is Chris Taylor, and I'm the curator of crustaceans here at the Illinois Natural History Survey. And we are now in the crustacean collection of the Illinois Natural History Survey. This is a collection of mostly freshwater crustaceans, and within that group, mostly freshwater crayfishes. We do have some freshwater shrimps and some other crustaceans like amphipods, isopods, fairy shrimps, some of those smaller, lesser-known crustacean groups that we find in freshwater. We probably now have more requests for data, the collection localities for our species, than we do people actually looking at the specimen. So we send out an awful lot of our data to external organizations, either other university academic researchers, government agencies, nonprofit conservation organizations. They want to know which species occur where in aquatic ecosystems, how common they are. So using the data in the last 15 or 20 years has become more common than using the specimens, because we have fewer and fewer taxonomists that are actually have hands-on experience and need to look at the specimens. Okay, so in addition to part of the taxonomic revision, taxonomic studies, examining specimens, there's also undescribed, undiscovered biodiversity in these collections. Any museum collection will have specimens that have been previously collected by a researcher that may not have been familiar with the group, and just put a name on the species of something that may have been closely related. But once someone goes back and examines these specimens in our collection in a little more detail, they can discover that, in fact, there is a different species here. There are morphological differences between the specimen in the jar and another name that's out there for a closely related species. So there's most certainly undescribed biodiversity, and I myself have found specimens in other museum collections that had another name kind of masquerading under another name for a species, and when you look at the specimens, you discover just that, a new species. This was a species that we found in south central Tennessee. What's unique about this crayfish was, one, as you can tell by looking at it, it's a very large species, probably one of the largest species in North America. It has some very distinctive morphological features in having fringes, very long bearded setae on its antennae. And this was a unique find in that it occurred in a very easily accessible habitat type in an area of the state that had been thoroughly sampled by aquatic biologists for many, many years. Both ichthyologists and asticologists had been through that area collecting crayfish in habitats that weren't all that difficult to sample. And this thing never turned up. And then about 3 years ago, someone collected a specimen, sent us a photograph. We instantly recognized it as something different, but our first assumption was that it was an introduced population of another species known from Kentucky that has that same morphological feature, the setae on the antennae. So we went down and sampled the area very intensively on multiple visits, and were able to turn up 2 or 3 more specimens. And when we looked at those specimens more closely and compared them to other museum specimens from the other species that we assumed it was an introduced population of, we determined that it was in fact a new species. We also looked at the DNA, and the DNA came back and gave us the same answer, that it was a distinct species. So another example of the value of museum collection. So we had this new thing we collected in the field, but without museum specimens to lay side by side with it to make that comparison, it would have been much more difficult for us to determine that it was in fact a new species. So the uniqueness was, one, it was a very distinctive crayfish, would have been easily recognized as a new species by other researchers, but it occurred basically right under our noses in an area that had been thoroughly sampled. And so it's good to see that there's still undiscovered biodiversity right here in our backyard. We don't have to go to the Amazon or Southeast Asia to discover new species. They're right here. We just have to look a little harder.